Emma's hands trembled as she opened the leather journal. Then she saw it. Grace family, April 15, 1889. 4 casualties. Her father's name. The cabin door opened. The stranger who had saved her life stood there, snow dusting his shoulders. Their eyes met, and Emma whispered the words that would change everything. "You killed my father." But this story begins 5 days earlier. The winter of 1895 came to the Ozark Mountains like a fist wrapped in ice. Snow fell in thick curtains across the Missouri wilderness, transforming the familiar landscape into something alien and hostile. The pine forests stood silent under their white burden branches, bowed in submission to the cold. In the valleys below, smoke rose from chimneys in thin gray ribbons, the only sign that humans still clung to life in this frozen world. 9-year-old Ethan Bennett knew he should not have been at the mine that night. His mother, Sarah, had warned him 100 times to stay away from the Blackwell operation after dark, when the supervisors went home and the night crew worked by lamplight. But Ethan had dropped his father's pocket watch somewhere in the upper gallery that afternoon, and the thought of losing the only thing he had left of the man who died a year ago was unbearable. So he climbed through the small service entrance that the bigger workers could not fit through his thin frame, slipping easily into the darkness. The mine smelled of dust and sweat, and something metallic that made his nose wrinkle. Somewhere below, he could hear the distant clang of tools, the voices of men who worked through the night because Silas Blackwell paid them $3 more per shift. Ethan found the watch wedged between 2 support beams in the upper gallery, its gold case glinting in the moonlight that filtered through gaps in the wooden roof. Relief flooded through him as he clutched it to his chest. He turned to leave, already composing the lie he would tell his mother about where he had been. That was when he saw Cole Turner. The foreman stood on the main platform below, silhouetted against a hanging oil lamp. Even from 30 feet above, Ethan could see the distinctive scar that ran down the left side of Turner's face, a souvenir from a knife fight in Kansas City that everyone in Springfield Hollow knew about. Turner was not alone. 2 other men stood with him, their faces hidden in shadow. Ethan should have left then, should have climbed back through the service entrance and run home to his mother's arms. But something in Turner's posture made him freeze. The foreman was doing something to the main cable, the thick steel rope that held up the primary lift platform. His hands worked quickly, methodically, with the practiced motion of someone who had done this before. The boy pressed himself flat against the gallery floor, peering through a gap between the boards. Turner had a pair of heavy shears, the kind used for cutting wire fencing. He was positioning them around individual strands of the cable, cutting through them one by one. Not completely severing the cable, Ethan realized with growing horror, but weakening it, making it look intact while ensuring it would fail. One of the men with Turner spoke, his voice carrying up to where Ethan hid. "You sure about this? 3 men die. Blackwell's going to have questions." Turner's response was cold, factual, devoid of any human feeling. "Blackwell don't want questions. He wants the organizing to stop. Samuel Grace's brother-in-law works this shift. Accident happens, workers get scared, union talk dies down. That's what the man pays us for." The shears bit through another strand, and another. Below, completely unaware, 3 miners climbed onto the lift platform. Ethan recognized 2 of them. Michael Chin, who sometimes brought candies to the children. Robert Hayes, who had a new baby at home. The third man he did not know, but it did not matter. They were all about to die. Turner finished his work and stepped back, examining the cable with the critical eye of a craftsman. To anyone else it would look perfect. But Ethan had watched his father work with cables and pulleys for years before the cave-in took him. He could see what Turner had done. The cable would hold for maybe 10 minutes under load. Then physics and gravity would finish what Turner started. The foreman and his companions disappeared down a side tunnel. On the platform below, one of the miners pulled the control lever. The lift began to descend into the deeper shaft. Ethan counted in his head the way his father had taught him. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi. He got to 73 when the cable snapped. The sound was unlike anything the boy had ever heard, a metallic shriek followed by the crashing thunder of the platform plummeting down the shaft. The screams of the three men cut off abruptly, replaced by a terrible, echoing silence. Ethan's bladder let go. Warm urine soaked his trousers, but he barely noticed. His hand was clamped over his mouth to keep from vomiting, from screaming, from making any sound that would reveal his presence. A minute passed. 2. Then Turner emerged from the side tunnel, walking calmly toward the shaft opening. He peered down into the darkness, then nodded with satisfaction. One of his companions appeared beside him. "That's done then. Blackwell'll be pleased." Turner turned toward the exit. His eyes swept across the upper gallery, scanning the shadows. For one heart-stopping moment, his gaze seemed to lock directly onto where Ethan lay hidden. The boy saw the exact instant when Turner spotted him, saw the foreman's eyes narrow, his body go still with predatory focus. Their gazes met across the darkness, and Ethan saw his own death reflected in those cold eyes. Then Turner was moving, running toward the ladder that led up to the gallery. Ethan scrambled backward, his hands and knees scrabbling for purchase on the wooden planks. He threw himself toward the service entrance, his small size now his only advantage. Behind him, he heard Turner's boots hitting the ladder rungs, the man's breathing, the sound of a knife being drawn from a leather sheath. Ethan squeezed through the service entrance just as Turner's hand grabbed at his ankle. Fingers brushed his boot, missing by inches. The boy kicked backward blindly and felt his heel connect with something soft. Turner cursed, and Ethan was through, tumbling out into the snow. He ran. Blood pounded in his ears. His lungs burned with each gasping breath of frozen air. Behind him, he heard shouting, more men emerging from the mine. They had seen him. They knew he had witnessed everything. The forest swallowed him, pine branches whipping across his face. His right leg throbbed where he had caught it on something sharp during his escape, and he could feel warm blood soaking through his torn trousers. But he did not stop. Could not stop. 3 men were dead. He had seen them murdered, and if Cole Turner caught him, he would be the 4th. Sarah Bennett, 28 years old and widowed for a year, was mending clothes by candlelight when her son crashed through the door of their small cabin. One look at his face, at the blood on his leg, and the terror in his eyes told her everything she needed to know. Something terrible had happened, something that would change their lives forever. Ethan's words tumbled out in a breathless rush, tripping over each other in his panic. The mine, Cole Turner, the cable, the 3 men falling, Turner seeing him, men chasing him through the snow. Sarah's hands shook as she pressed a cloth against the gash on her son's leg. Her mind raced through possibilities and discarded them just as quickly. Go to the sheriff. Wade. Carson was a good man, but his jurisdiction ended at the Springfield Hollowtown limits. The mine was outside his authority. Go to the territorial marshal. The nearest office was 3 days' ride away, and they would never make it. Silas Blackwell owned half of Missouri, and his influence reached far beyond the borders of his mining operation. There was only one place that might offer sanctuary, one place where even Blackwell's money and violence might not reach. "Pack what you can carry," Sarah told her son, forcing her voice to remain steady. "We're going to the convent." St. Agnes sat in a valley 20 miles north of Springfield Hollow, a small stone building surrounded by gardens that lay dormant now beneath the winter snow. 8 nuns lived there in prayer and service, removed from the world, but not entirely separate from it. They ran a small infirmary, took in women fleeing dangerous situations, and asked no questions of those who sought their help. Most importantly, the convent was run by Mother Constance, a woman who had lived through the Civil War and buried 3 sons before taking her vows. She did not frighten easily, and she had no love for men like Silas Blackwell, who crushed the weak beneath their boots. The journey took Sarah and Ethan 4 hours through the snow. They followed deer trails and logging roads, staying off the main paths where Turner's men might be searching. Twice they heard dogs in the distance, and once they saw torchlight through the trees. But they were small and quick, and the storm that had begun to fall worked in their favor, covering their tracks almost as quickly as they made them. Dawn was breaking when they stumbled up to the convent gate. Sarah's hands were too numb with cold to work the bell pull, so she simply beat on the wooden gate with her fists until a small window opened. Sister Margaret, the youngest of the nuns at 19, peered out at them. Her eyes widened when she saw the state they were in. The window slammed shut, and moments later the gate swung open. Inside the convent walls, Sarah finally allowed herself to collapse. Strong hands caught her, guided her toward the warmth of the chapel. Someone was carrying Ethan, wrapping him in blankets. Voices spoke in low, urgent tones. Then another voice cut through the fog in Sarah's mind, aged but strong, carrying the weight of authority earned through decades of service. "Bring them to my chambers. Wake Sister Emma. Tell her to bring her medical supplies." Mother Constance was 68 years old, her face lined with the story of a hard life that had somehow refined rather than broken her. She had been the convent's Mother Superior for 20 years, and in that time she had seen nearly everything humanity was capable of, both terrible and beautiful. But as she listened to Sarah Bennett's story, as she examined the frightened boy with the wounded leg, something in her expression hardened into resolve. This was not just another family fleeing poverty or domestic violence. This was murder, witnessed by a child covered up by one of the most powerful men in the state. "Sister Emma," she called, and a young woman appeared in the doorway. Emma Grace was 24 years old, though she looked younger in the simple black habit and white veil of her order. She had been at St. Agnes for 6 years, ever since the death of her father had driven her to seek refuge in prayer and service. Her face held a kind of stillness that some mistook for serenity, but was actually the careful control of someone who had learned to lock her emotions away. She carried a worn leather medical bag that had once belonged to her father. Samuel Grace had been a miner, but he had also been the closest thing Springfield Hollow had to a doctor for the workers. He had taught his daughter what he knew about setting bones and treating wounds, knowledge she had continued to use in the convent's infirmary. "The boy needs attention," Mother Constance said simply, and Emma moved forward without hesitation. Ethan flinched when she first touched his leg, but Emma's hands were gentle, practiced. She cleaned the wound with water and carbolic acid, her face showing no reaction to the boy's whimpers of pain. The cut was deep but clean, no sign of the infection that killed more miners than cave-ins. She worked quickly, applying a poultice of golden seal and binding the leg with fresh bandages. "He'll heal," she said quietly, more to Sarah than to Mother Constance. "Keep the dressing clean and change daily. Watch for fever." "Thank you, sister." Sarah's voice broke on the words, tears finally coming now that her son was safe. Mother Constance waited until Emma had finished her work before speaking again. Her voice was low, meant only for the young nun's ears. "I need you to take them to Springfield, to Sheriff Carson." Emma's hands stilled on the medical supplies she was repacking. She looked up at the older woman, confusion and something that might have been fear crossing her face. "Mother, I've never been more than 5 miles from the convent. I don't know the mountain routes. I know, child." Mother Constance took Emma's hands in her own weathered ones. The old nun's grip was surprisingly strong. "But Sheriff Carson is the only lawman in 3 counties who isn't in Blackwell's pocket. If anyone can protect this boy and see justice done, it's him. And you're the only one I can send. Sister Margaret is too young. Sister Anne's arthritis won't allow the journey. The others are too old or too frail. But why not just send word, a message? Because Blackwell will be watching the roads. Messages can be intercepted. Riders can be stopped." Mother Constance's voice was gentle but implacable. The only way to ensure they reach safety is for someone to guide them personally. Someone Blackwell's men won't expect. Someone who can move through the wilderness without drawing attention. Emma wanted to argue, wanted to explain that she was not brave, not capable, not the right person for this task. 6 years ago, she had come to this convent to escape the world, to hide from the questions and the pain that came with her father's death. She had chosen contemplation over action, prayer over involvement, silence over speech. But as she looked at Ethan, at his pale face and frightened eyes, something stirred in her chest, something she thought she had buried along with her father. She thought of the day they had told her Samuel Grace was dead, thought of the official report that called it an accident, a tragic result of unsafe practices and bad luck. Thought of the way people had whispered at the funeral, how conversations stopped when she walked by. Even at 18, she had known there was more to the story, had seen the fear in people's eyes when they spoke of Blackwell, the way they looked over their shoulders before saying his name. Her mother had begged her not to ask questions. "Don't, Emma. You'll end up like your father if you keep pushing." 6 months later, her mother was dead too, though the doctor called it a weak heart. Emma knew better. Her mother had died of grief and fear of carrying the weight of a truth she could never speak. Emma had run to the convent rather than face that truth, had hidden behind prayers and routine and the comfortable numbness of a life removed from the world's pain. Looking at Ethan now, she saw herself at that age, saw a child about to lose everything because of Silas Blackwell's greed, saw history preparing to repeat itself unless someone was brave enough to stop it. "When do we leave?" she asked. Mother Constance's lined face softened with something that might have been pride. "As soon as you're ready. The journey is 20 miles through mountain terrain. If you push hard and the weather holds, you can make it by nightfall. But child," she gripped Emma's hands tighter, "this will not be a simple walk. Blackwell will have men searching. There may be danger. You must be prepared for that." Emma thought of her father's face, of the question she had never asked, of 6 years spent in silence and safety while others suffered under Blackwell's rule. "I'm prepared," she said, and surprised herself by meaning it. They left at midday when the weak winter sun was at its highest. Emma wore her heavy wool cloak over her habit practical boots instead of the thin shoes she normally wore. She carried a small pack with food blankets and her medical supplies. Sarah had her own pack, lighter but still substantial. Ethan walked between them, limping slightly on his bandaged leg, but determined not to slow them down. The first 10 miles went smoothly. Mother Constance had given them detailed directions routes that stayed away from the main trails where Blackwell's men might patrol. They followed old logging roads and game trails, moving through the silent forest under branches heavy with snow. Emma found herself remembering skills her father had taught her as a child before the mine consumed all his time. How to read the land, how to find water, how to move quietly through the wilderness. Samuel Grace had been born in these mountains and knew them like other men knew their own homes. Some of that knowledge had passed to his daughter dormant, but not lost. As they walked, Sarah told her story in quiet fragments. Her husband David had died in a mine accident a year ago. Everyone said it was bad luck, old equipment, the inherent dangers of the work. But David had come home the week before his death, talking about safety violations, about support beams that should have been replaced, about Blackwell cutting corners to increase profits. He was going to report it, Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. Was going to go to the territorial authorities. Then 3 days later the ceiling collapsed right where he was working. They said it was random, said there was no way to predict it. But David had been working mines for 15 years. He knew which sections were dangerous. He would never have been there unless someone told him to be. Emma felt something cold settle in her stomach. Her father had been organizing workers, pushing for safety reforms and fair wages. Sarah's husband had been preparing to report violations. Both had died in accidents that seemed awfully convenient for Silas Blackwell. "How many others?" she asked quietly. Sarah's response was immediate, as if she had been counting. "In the past 6 years, at least 15 that I know of, probably more. Every time someone gets brave enough to challenge Blackwell, something happens. An accident at the mine, a house fire, a robbery gone wrong. The man's killed more people than cholera, and everyone just looks the other way. 15 people, 15 families destroyed, 15 sets of children left fatherless or parentless, 15 wives made widows, 15 futures erased. All for the profit margins of one man who already had more money than he could spend in 3 lifetimes. Emma's hand went unconsciously to the small wooden cross she wore beneath her habit. She had spent 6 years praying for her father's soul, praying for the strength to forgive his death, praying for peace. But perhaps she had been praying for the wrong things. Perhaps what was needed was not forgiveness, but justice. Not peace, but action. They had covered about 12 miles when Emma first heard the dogs. The sound came from behind them, still distant but unmistakable. The baying of hounds on a scent. Multiple animals, probably 6 or more, and they were moving fast. "Run!" Emma said the word, coming out calm despite the fear that suddenly flooded through her. "We need to run now." They ran. Emma's breath came in ragged gasps, each inhalation burning her lungs with cold air. Ethan was crying but kept moving his mother's hand tight around his. The dogs grew louder, closer. Through the trees behind them, Emma could hear men shouting, urging the animals on. Her habit snagged on branches. The heavy fabric that had always felt like protection now felt like a trap, slowing her down, making every movement harder. Beside her, Sarah stumbled and went down, Ethan falling with her. Emma hauled them both up, her hands finding strength she did not know she possessed. "Keep going. Don't stop." But the dogs were so close now. Emma could hear their panting, their eager whining as they closed in on their prey. She risked a glance back and saw the first hound burst through the underbrush, a massive wolf-dog hybrid with jaws that could crush bone. They were not going to make it. The realization came with absolute clarity. The dogs were too fast, too many. In seconds they would be brought down, torn apart, and when Blackwell's men arrived, they would find 3 more victims of the cruel Ozark wilderness. Emma's foot caught on a hidden root. She pitched forward, her hands barely catching her fall. Cold snow pressed against her face, and for a moment the exhaustion was so overwhelming she wanted to just stay there. Let the cold take her. Let it all end. Then she felt small arms around her neck. Ethan pulling at her, his voice high with terror. "Sister Emma, please, please get up." She thought of her father, thought of what he would say if he could see her now. Samuel Grace had not raised a daughter who gave up, had not taught her to read and write and think so she could lie down and die at the first real challenge. Emma pushed herself up. Ahead through the swirling snow she saw it. A dark shape, solid and real. A cabin. "There!" she gasped, pointing. "Run for that cabin!" They ran. Behind them the lead dog was so close Emma could hear the click of its claws on frozen ground. 20 yards to the cabin. 15. 10. The largest wolf dog burst from the trees directly at them. Its massive jaws opened wide, going straight for Ethan on Emma's back. She tried to turn to shield the boy with her body, knowing she was too late, knowing they were about to die. The gunshot came from a different direction entirely. The report echoed off the surrounding hills, impossibly loud. The dog dropped mid-leap, dead before it hit the snow. A perfect shot through the heart from at least 50 yards. From the darkness between the pines a figure emerged. Tall, broad across the shoulders, moving with the easy grace of someone who belonged to this wilderness. A long rifle rested in his hands, smoke still rising from the barrel. His face was mostly hidden behind a thick, dark beard, but his eyes caught what little light remained. Cold and blue as winter ice. When he spoke, his voice was low and rough, like gravel shifting in a stream bed. Each word was measured, economical, the speech of someone who had spent years with only silence for company. "Follow me, now." Emma hesitated for only a heartbeat. Behind them, more dogs were crashing through the brush. She could hear men loading their weapons, shouting coordinates to each other. They had seconds, not minutes. "Who are you?" she managed. The stranger was already moving toward the cabin. He did not look back as he answered. "Someone with the only shelter for 10 miles. You want to argue, or you want to live?" Another bullet whined past them, close enough that Emma felt the displacement of air. The decision made itself. "We go!" Sarah gasped, and they ran. The stranger led them through what looked like random trees, but was clearly a path only he could see. In seconds they were at the cabin's door. He pushed it open and stepped aside, gesturing them in with the rifle. Inside was warmth and firelight. A stone fireplace already burning furs on the floor, rifles mounted on the wall. Everything spoke of someone who knew how to survive alone, who had made an art of self-sufficiency. The stranger followed them in and barred the door with a heavy timber. Then he moved to the window, watching the forest with the patient intensity of a predator waiting for prey to reveal itself. "They'll search," he said quietly, his eyes never leaving the tree line. "But they won't find this place. Not in this storm. I know how to hide." Emma lowered Ethan carefully onto a rough wooden bench near the fire. The boy was shaking his lips blue with cold. Sarah collapsed beside her son, sobbing with relief and exhaustion. The stranger set his rifle aside and knelt beside Ethan without a word. His movements were surprisingly gentle as he examined the leg wound, his large scarred hands careful not to cause more pain. "This needs cleaning and fresh bandages," he said. "The bleeding stopped, but infection is starting." "I can help," Emma said quickly. "I know some medicine." The stranger glanced at her, really looking at her for the first time. His eyes lingered on her habit, the traditional garb of a Catholic nun, now soaked and torn. Something shifted in his expression there, and gone too quickly to read. "You're far from any church, sister. We had good reason to run." He studied her for another moment, then stood and moved to a shelf. He returned with clean cloth, a bottle of whiskey, and dried herbs Emma recognized as golden seal. Natural antiseptic, her father had called it, one of the few things that could fight infection when proper medicine was not available. "Then we'd better make sure you survive," the stranger said, handing her the supplies. "You know what to do with these?" Emma nodded. Her father had been a miner. Accidents were common. She had learned young how to treat wounds, how to fight infection with what little they had. As she worked on Ethan's leg, cleaning the wound with whiskey, while Sarah held her son's hand, Emma watched the stranger from the corner of her eye. He moved around the cabin with quiet efficiency, adding wood to the fire, heating water, pulling down blankets from a high shelf. Every action was purposeful, economical, the movements of someone who had lived alone for a very long time. Ethan whimpered as Emma applied the golden seal paste. The stranger's voice came unexpectedly soft. "Brave boy, the worst is over." "Are you a hunter?" Ethan asked through his pain, trying to be brave himself. The corner of the man's mouth moved almost a smile. "Yes, son." "Do you hunt bears?" "Sometimes, but bears are more polite than the men out there." Emma found herself making a sound, half laugh, half sob. The stranger's eyes flicked to her, and she saw something shift in them. Recognition of shared humanity, perhaps, or just surprise that she could still find anything funny after what they had been through. "What's your name?" she asked as she tied off the bandage. He hesitated, as if the answer cost him something. When he finally spoke, it was with the reluctance of someone sharing a secret. "Nate Collier. Most people called me Nate. Before." "Before what?" "Before I came here. Before I decided being alone was safer than being around people." Sarah looked up, tears still streaming down her face. "Thank you, Mr. Collier. Thank you for not leaving us to die." Nate's jaw tightened. He turned away, busying himself with the fire, and when he spoke his voice was carefully neutral. "Storm will last 2 more days. You can't travel. You'll stay here until it passes." It was not quite a question, but Emma answered anyway. "We're grateful." As night fell and the storm howled around the cabin, Nate prepared a simple meal. Rabbit stew, the meat tender from long cooking, seasoned with wild herbs. The 3 refugees ate hungrily, warmth slowly returning to their bones. Ethan fell asleep almost immediately after eating, exhausted and finally safe. Sarah curled around her son, her own eyes closing within minutes. Emma sat by the fire, her habit steaming as it dried. Her hands still shook, but whether from cold or delayed shock she could not say. The last 12 hours felt surreal, like something from a fever dream. Had she really run through a blizzard? Had she really seen men murdered? Had she really watched a stranger shoot a dog that was about to tear them apart? Nate poured hot tea into 2 tin cups, offered her one. Pine needle tea, not fancy but warm. She took it gratefully. "Better than anything I've had all day." He sat across from her, separated by the fire. For a long moment neither spoke. Outside the wind screamed like something alive and angry. Inside, the fire crackled and popped, sending shadows dancing across the walls. "I've never been hunted before," Emma said quietly. "Never had men trying to kill me." "You get used to it." She looked at him sharply. "I don't want to get used to it." For the first time, something like approval crossed his face. "That's good. Don't ever get used to evil. The day you do, you become part of it." There was weight in those words. History. Emma wanted to ask what he meant, but something in his expression told her the door was closing. She tried a different question instead. "Why do you live out here alone?" Nate stared into the fire. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper, and Emma had to lean forward to hear him over the storm. "Because there are things I need to forget, things I can't forget, so I try to disappear instead." "Does it work?" "No." The honesty of it struck Emma harder than any confession she had heard in 6 years of convent life. This man, whoever he was, carried pain so deep it had driven him into the wilderness to die slowly alone. Not the quick death of suicide, but the gradual erasure of self that came from complete isolation. "I don't think God wants us to disappear," she said softly. Nate's laugh was bitter. "God and I parted ways a long time ago, sister." "Maybe. But you saved us tonight. That's not the act of a man God has abandoned. That's the act of a man who still has goodness in him, whether he wants to admit it or not." Nate stood abruptly. "You should rest. Tomorrow will be hard." He moved to the far corner of the cabin, laying out a bedroll for himself, keeping watch by the door. Emma understood she had touched something raw, something he was not ready to examine. She settled onto the furs near Ethan, and Sarah, exhaustion finally overwhelming fear. As she drifted toward sleep, she heard Nate's voice so quiet she almost missed it. "Thank you, sister." "For what?" "For still believing people can be good." Emma woke to find Nate already gone out checking his trap lines despite the storm. Ethan was better, his fever-down color returning to his face. Sarah held her son close, whispering prayers of gratitude. Emma stood and looked around the cabin in daylight. It was sparse but clean, everything in its place. A man's refuge built to keep the world out. But something caught her eye. A wooden box under Nate's bedroll, one corner visible where the blanket had shifted. She should have looked away, should have respected his privacy. But something pulled at her, an instinct born of 6 years watching her father's killers walk free, of knowing there were secrets that needed to be uncovered. Emma glanced at Sarah and Ethan, both still sleeping. She knelt beside the bedroll and carefully pulled the box free. Inside were papers, old letters, a tintype photograph of a family, the kind minor families had taken when they could afford it, and beneath everything, a leather journal. Emma opened it with trembling hands. The pages were filled with neat handwriting dates, names, locations. At first, she could not make sense of it. Then she saw a name she recognized. Grace family, April 15, 1889. Coal strike suppression. 4 casualties. The world tilted. Grace was her family name, her father's name. April 1889 was when he died, when 3 others died with him in what everyone was told was an accident during the strike. Emma flipped through more pages, more names, more dates, more casualties. This was not a diary. This was a record, a confession, a catalog of killing. Her hands shook so badly she almost dropped the journal. She forced herself to read more, found references to Silas Blackwell, found the truth she had suspected for 6 years but never been able to prove. Her father had not died in an accident. He had been murdered by strikebreakers sent to crush the union organizing, murdered by men hired by Silas Blackwell, murdered by men like the one whose cabin she was standing in. The cabin door opened. Nate stood in the doorway, snow dusting his shoulders, fresh meat hanging from his belt. His eyes went immediately to Emma, kneeling by his bedroll, the journal in her hands. All the color drained from his face. "Sister Emma," he said, his voice hollow, already knowing what she had found. "Put that down." But Emma could not move, could not think, could only stare at the man who had saved her life last night, the man who might have destroyed it 6 years ago. "You worked for Blackwell," she whispered. You killed strikers. You killed my father." Nate closed his eyes. When he opened them again, Emma saw something she had not seen before. Not just pain, guilt, so deep and crushing it seemed to bend him under its weight. "Yes," he said simply, making no excuses, offering no justification. "I did." The silence that followed was absolute. Outside, the storm continued its assault on the mountain. Inside, the fire crackled cheerfully, ignorant of the way everything had just changed. Sarah stirred in her sleep, and Ethan mumbled something incoherent. Emma stood slowly, the journal clutched in shaking hands. She looked at Nate Collier, this stranger who was not a stranger, this savior who was also a killer, this man whose actions had shaped the course of her entire adult life without her even knowing it. "Tell me," she said, and her voice was cold as the snow outside. "Tell me everything. Tell me exactly how you murdered my father." And Nate, who had spent 6 years running from this moment, who had hidden in these mountains to escape this very conversation, finally stopped running. He closed the door behind him, set down the fresh meat, and with the tired resignation of a man who had always known this day would come, he began to speak. The confession began with a name. Not Samuel Grace, though that came later, not even Silas Blackwell, though his shadow hung over every word. The confession began with Tommy Wright, age 7, who died asking why it hurt so bad. Nate stood motionless in the cabin doorway, snow melting off his shoulders in small rivulets that pooled on the wooden floor. His hands hung loose at his sides, empty of weapons, empty of defenses. He looked like a man awaiting execution, resigned to whatever judgment came. Emma remained where she stood, the journal clutched against her chest like a shield. Behind her, Sarah had woken but stayed silent, one protective arm around Ethan. The boy's eyes were wide, frightened, sensing the tension without understanding its source. 6 years ago, Nate began, his voice flat and dead, I was a different man. Or maybe I was always this man and just didn't know it yet. Hard to say which is worse. He moved slowly to sit on the wooden bench near the door, as far from Emma as the small cabin allowed. His hands rested on his knees, and he stared at them as if they belonged to someone else. Blackwell hired me as security. That's what he called it. Security. Made it sound legitimate, like I'd be protecting property and keeping order. He said there was trouble at the mines, agitators causing problems, men who didn't understand how business worked, who wanted to destroy good jobs with their unreasonable demands. Nate's voice remained steady, but Emma could hear the self-loathing beneath it, bitter and corrosive. I believed him. Or I didn't care. I needed the money, and I was good with a gun. Had been in the army, served in the Indian Wars out west. Knew how to follow orders, knew how to not ask questions. That's what Blackwell wanted. Men who could do what needed doing without troubling themselves about the why of it. Emma wanted to interrupt, to demand he get to the point, to hear about her father. But something in Nate's posture told her this was not a story that could be rushed. This was a confession, 6 years in the making, and it would come out in its own time, or not at all. Your father, Nate said finally, looking up at Emma. Samuel Grace was organizing the miners, trying to get them fair wages, safe conditions, basic things that should have been givens but weren't. Blackwell saw him as a threat, said Grace was going to destroy the mine, put hundreds of men out of work, ruin the local economy. He paused, and Emma saw his throat work as he swallowed. Blackwell sent me and 3 others to Grace's home one night. We were supposed to scare him, show force, make it clear what would happen if he kept organizing. We weren't supposed to kill anyone. At least that's what Blackwell told us. Looking back, I think he knew exactly what would happen. Think he wanted it to happen. The fire popped loudly, making everyone in the cabin jump. Nate's hands had formed into fists on his knees, knuckles white with pressure. Someone fired first. To this day I don't know who. Maybe it was Grace defending his home. Maybe it was one of the men with me, trigger finger too eager. Maybe it was me, and I've just blocked it out. When the smoke cleared, 4 people were dead. Emma felt tears burning down her cheeks. She had known her father was murdered, had suspected it for 6 years. But hearing the words spoken aloud, hearing the clinical recounting of that night, made it real in a way it had never been before. Samuel Grace, John Wright, Thomas Chen. Nate's voice broke on the next name. And Tommy Wright, 7 years old. He was the son of one of the men with me. John had brought the boy along, God knows why. Maybe he couldn't find anyone to watch him. Maybe he wanted Tommy to see what his daddy did for a living. The boy followed us to the Grace house, hid in the bushes to watch the excitement. Nate's hands unclenched and Emma saw they were shaking. He caught a stray bullet, came running out of the bushes screaming for his daddy, and someone's gun went off. Mine or Murphy's or Chen's. The bullet hit Tommy in the chest. I got to him first. Held him while he died. Took about 3 minutes. He kept asking why it hurt so bad. Kept saying he was sorry for following his daddy, begging me to tell his mama he didn't mean to cause trouble. He died before I could tell him it wasn't his fault. Before I could tell him anything. The silence that followed was suffocating. Emma tried to speak and found she could not. Her throat had closed her chest tight with a grief that was both 6 years old and freshly raw. Sarah's voice came instead, quiet but steady. My husband David knew John Wright, worked the same shifts sometimes. John went crazy after Tommy died, started drinking, died in a bar fight 6 months later. His wife Mary remarried, but people said she was never the same. Said she saw Tommy and every child she passed on the street. Nate nodded, still not looking up. I went to the funeral, stood in the back where Mary wouldn't see me, watched her bury her son and her husband's soul all in one day. That's when I knew I couldn't stay. Couldn't face what I'd done. Couldn't live with the man I'd become. He finally raised his head, meeting Emma's eyes directly. His face was wet with tears he seemed unaware of. Blackwell was ready to pin everything on me anyway. Said I'd gone rogue, acted without orders. He had lawyers prepared, witnesses lined up to testify. I was unstable, violent, acted alone. I could have fought it. Could have told the truth, brought him down with me. But when I looked at Mary Wright's face at that funeral, when I saw what I'd taken from her, I couldn't add to it. Couldn't put her through a trial where she'd have to hear every detail of how her son died. So I let Blackwell throw me to the wolves. Signed a confession that wasn't quite true but was close enough. Then I ran before they could hang me. Emma found her voice, though it came out harsh and broken. You should have stayed. You should have fought. Told the truth. I know. My father deserved justice. I know. All those families deserve the truth. I know. Nate's voice was raw. I've known for 6 years. Every day I know. Every day I wake up in this cabin and I know that I'm a coward who ran instead of making things right. Every night I lie down knowing that Samuel Grace and John Wright and Thomas Chen and little Tommy are dead because of me, and I did nothing to hold Blackwell accountable. I know, Sister Emma. Believe me, I know. Emma looked at the journal in her hands. Evidence. Proof of Blackwell's crimes. Proof that could bring down the man who had terrorized her community for years. She thought of Mother Constance's words. Faith is action. Blackwell is still doing this, she said slowly, her voice growing stronger as the realization crystallized. Still killing miners, still covering it up. Ethan saw Cole Turner cut that cable. 3 more men are dead. How many more will die if we do nothing? Nate looked up at her, confusion and hope warring in his expression. You want justice for your father? Emma's voice was hard now, the grief transmuting into something sharper, more focused. You want to make this right? Then help us. Help us get to Springfield. Help us bring down Blackwell. Tell the truth finally after 6 years of hiding. They'll hang me. Maybe. Emma stepped closer and Nate flinched as if she had struck him. But at least you'll die having done something good. Something that matters. You saved us last night. You can save others. That's redemption, Nate Collier. Not hiding, not dying slowly in these mountains. Actually doing something to balance the scales. Sarah spoke up, her voice quiet but firm. The sister is right. You're not the same man who came to my husband's funeral 6 years ago. I can see it. You've changed. The guilt has changed you. Changing doesn't erase what I did. No, Emma agreed, and her voice softened slightly. But it means something. It means you're not beyond saving. It means there's still good in you buried under all that guilt and self-hatred. It means you still have a choice about who you want to be. Nate sat in silence for a long time. The storm continued to rage outside, wind howling through the pines like the voices of the dead demanding justice. Finally, he raised his head. "If I do this, I'm a dead man. Either Blackwell kills me or the law hangs me." "Then die for something that matters," Emma said quietly. "Die standing up instead of hiding. Die knowing you finally did the right thing." Something shifted in Nate's eyes. After 6 years of running from his past, maybe he was finally ready to face it. After 6 years of slow suicide through isolation, maybe he was ready to actually live, however briefly. "All right," he said. "When the storm breaks, we go to Springfield together, and I tell the truth. All of it." Emma felt something loosen in her chest. Not forgiveness. She was not ready for that, might never be ready for that. But maybe the beginning of understanding. Maybe the first step towards something that might someday become redemption. "Thank you," she said. Nate stood and moved to the window, looking out at the endless white. "Don't thank me yet, sister. The hard part hasn't even started." He was right. Neither of them knew just how hard it would become. The storm trapped them in the cabin for another full day and night. Under other circumstances, the forced proximity might have been unbearable. But necessity created its own rules. They needed to survive before they could worry about justice or redemption or the complex tangle of guilt and grief that bound them together. Nate taught Emma how to use a gun. She had refused at first, recoiling from the weapon he held out to her as if it were a serpent. "I'm a nun. I can't." "You're a woman being hunted by killers," Nate corrected, his voice patient. "God will understand." "I don't know if I can." "You won't know until you have to." He had stepped closer, showing her how to hold the revolver, how to aim. "Don't think. Don't hesitate. If someone threatens Ethan, you point and you pull the trigger. That's all. That's murder. That's survival. There's a difference." Emma had wanted to argue, wanted to quote scripture about turning the other cheek, about the sanctity of life. But she remembered the men chasing them through the storm, remembered the bullet that had nearly taken her head off. Those men would not hesitate. They would kill her, kill Ethan, kill Sarah, and sleep soundly that night. "Show me," she had said finally. They practiced outside in the brief periods when the snow let up. Emma fired at a tree trunk, her hands shaking so badly the first few shots went wildly astray. But Nate was patient, correcting her stance, her grip, her breathing. By the end of the second day, she could at least hit the tree more often than not. "You're doing fine," Nate said as she lowered the gun after her 10th shot. There was something in his voice that made her think he meant more than just the shooting. Inside the cabin, Ethan watched with wide eyes. "Sister Emma, you're like Annie Oakley." Despite everything, Emma smiled. "I don't think Annie Oakley was this bad a shot, sweetheart." During the long hours of waiting, Nate shared pieces of his history. Not the violence and guilt, but the life before that. He spoke of growing up in these mountains, son of a miner who died when Nate was 19. Spoke of a dog he once had named Ranger, loyal and dumb, and the best friend a boy could ask for. "He died of old age in his sleep head on my lap," Nate said one evening as they sat by the fire. "I was 17, cried like a baby. My father said, 'That's how you know you love something, if losing it breaks you.'" Emma thought of her own father, of the breaking that had sent her to the convent. "Your father was wise." "He was. Died in a mine collapse when I was 19. After that I sort of drifted. Took work where I could find it. Some of it good. Some of it—" He trailed off, but Emma understood. Some of it had led him to Silas Blackwell, to her father's door, to 6 years of self-imposed exile. "Do you think people can change?" she asked. "Really change? Not just say they're sorry, but actually become different?" Nate looked at her, and in the firelight, his face showed something that might have been hope. "I don't know, Sister Emma, but I'd like to find out." Sarah had her own moments of opening up. She spoke of David, the man she had loved since she was 16. Spoke of how the mine had changed him gradually, wearing him down shift by shift until he was a shadow of the vibrant young man she had married. "He used to sing," she said softly, holding Ethan close. "Had the most beautiful voice. but the dust got in his lungs, made breathing hard. The last year of his life he couldn't sing anymore, could barely talk without coughing. The mind killed him slowly before it killed him fast. Emma listened and felt the weight of all the stories, all the lives destroyed by Blackwell's greed. It was not just 4 men who died the night her father was killed. It was not just 3 men who died when that cable was cut. It was families, futures, possibilities. It was songs unsung and children never born, and love that turned to ash. On the 3rd morning the storm broke. Emma woke to silence so complete it seemed unnatural after days of howling wind. She rose and looked out the cabin window to see the Ozark Mountains wrapped in fresh snow, beautiful and deadly. Nate was already up preparing supplies. Dried meat, blankets, ammunition. His movements were efficient, practiced the actions of someone who had been preparing to run at a moment's notice for 6 years. "We should leave within the hour," he said without looking at her. "The snow will be hard-packed now, easier to travel, but Blackwell's men will be moving too." "How far to Springfield?" Sarah asked. 20 miles through the mountains. If we push hard, we can make it by nightfall." Emma felt her stomach tighten. 20 miles. 20 miles with Blackwell's men somewhere ahead of them or behind them or waiting in ambush. 20 miles with a wounded boy and an exhausted widow and a guilt-haunted killer who might be their only hope. "Then we'd better prepare," she said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. Just before they left, Nate knelt in front of Ethan. His voice was gentle, the same tone he had used when treating the boy's wound. "Listen to me, son. The next few hours are going to be hard. Cold may be scary, but you're tough, aren't you?" Ethan nodded, trying to be brave. "Good. You stick close to your mama and sister Emma. Do exactly what I tell you. Can you do that?" "Yes, sir." Nate ruffled the boy's hair, and Emma saw something crack in his expression. Regret, maybe. Or the ghost of Tommy Wright, the child he had held while life bled out 6 years ago. Then he stood the moment, passing his face, hardening back into the mask of control. "Let's move." The journey started well enough. Nate led them along a path only he could see, weaving between trees and over frozen streams with the confidence of someone who knew every inch of this wilderness. The morning sun made the snow sparkle like diamonds scattered by a careless god. For a little while, Emma could almost forget they were running for their lives. The beauty of the mountains in winter was undeniable, harsh and pure. This was God's country, she thought. This was the world as he made it before men like Blackwell corrupted it with their greed. But Nate never forgot. His hand stayed near his rifle, his eyes constantly scanning the forest. He was a man who had learned to expect violence, to prepare for it, to meet it head-on when it came. They had covered maybe 5 miles when Nate suddenly stopped, his head tilting like a wolf catching a scent. "What is it?" Emma whispered. He knelt, examining the snow with expert eyes. His face darkened as he read something in the tracks that Emma could not see. "Horses. 4 riders, maybe an hour old, heading the same direction we are." Sarah's face went white. "Blackwell's men. Who else would be out here after a storm like that?" Nate stood, his jaw tight. "They're between us and Springfield. Probably figured we'd head that way. Set up an ambush along the main trail." "So what do we do?" Nate thought for a moment, his eyes distant as he calculated routes and risks. "We go around. There's another route harder, but it'll keep us off the main path. Add a few hours, but it's safer." They changed direction, pushing deeper into the wilderness. The temperature was dropping as the sun climbed higher, one of those peculiar cruelties of mountain weather. Emma's feet were numb despite her boots, and she could see Ethan shivering despite the blankets wrapped around him. The new route took them through rougher terrain. They scrambled over fallen logs, pushed through dense underbrush that caught at their clothes and skin. Emma's habit was torn in a dozen places now, the heavy fabric that had once represented her devotion now just another burden to carry. They stopped briefly at midday to rest and eat. Nate shared out the dried meat and hard bread he had brought, rationing it carefully. No one complained about the small portions. They all understood they might need what remained. As they ate, Emma watched Nate. He sat apart from them, his back against a tree, his rifle across his lap. Even at rest he remained alert, watching the forest, reading the land for danger. It was hard to reconcile this careful, capable man with the killer from 6 years ago. Hard to match the gentle hands that had tended Ethan's wound with the hands that had held a dying child and done nothing to bring his killer to justice. People contained multitudes, Emma thought. They were capable of both great cruelty and great kindness, often within the same day, the same hour. The question was, which part they chose to nurture, which part they allowed to define them. Nate caught her watching him. For a moment their eyes met, and something passed between them. Not forgiveness, not even understanding, really, but perhaps acknowledgement. They were bound together now by circumstance and necessity, by shared guilt and shared purpose. Whatever happened next, they would face it together. The afternoon stretched on. They pushed through the snow, following Nate's invisible trail. Emma's legs ached. Her lungs burned with each breath of cold air. Beside her, Sarah struggled, but never complained, never asked to stop. Ethan remained silent on Emma's back, his small arms wrapped around her neck, trusting her completely to keep him safe. The trust terrified her. Who was she to be responsible for a child's life? She was a failed nun who had spent 6 years hiding from the world. She was a woman who had only yesterday learned to fire a gun, and poorly at that. She was Samuel Grace's daughter, still grieving, still angry, still broken by a loss she had never properly processed. But she was also the only thing standing between Ethan and Blackwell's hired killers. So she would be enough. She had to be. The wolves came at dusk. Emma heard them first, a low howling that raised the hair on her neck. She had heard wolves before, distant songs on quiet nights at the convent. But this was different. This was close and getting closer, the sound of predators who had caught a scent and were closing in. Nate heard them too. "Cave, there's one about 200 yards ahead. We need to reach it before they reach us." They ran. Emma had thought she was too tired to run anymore, but fear gave her new strength. She could hear the wolves behind them now, not howling anymore, but making a worse sound. The sound of predators closing in on prey. The sound of the hunt nearing its end. Ethan whimpered against her back. Sarah sobbed as she ran. And still the wolves came closer, their panting breath audible, now the clicking of claws on frozen ground. The cave appeared like salvation, a dark mouth in the hillside. Nate shoved them inside and immediately started gathering deadfall for a fire. His hands moved with desperate speed, striking flint-coaxing flame from dry moss and bark. The fire caught just as the first wolf appeared at the cave mouth. It was massive, gray and white, with eyes that caught the firelight and threw it back like mirrors. Behind it Emma could see others. 5, 6, a whole pack, and they looked hungry, desperate, dangerous. Nate raised his rifle. "Get behind me." The wolves circled, patient and deadly. They were not starving, Emma realized. This was not the attack of animals pushed to extremes by winter. This was something else. Territory, perhaps, or instinct, or just the simple fact that humans in the wilderness were prey like any other creature. The alpha wolf. The massive gray took a step into the cave. Nate fired a warning shot that sent rock chips flying near its head. The wolf did not even flinch. Its eyes remained locked on them, calculating, measuring, deciding. Another wolf, smaller and faster, darted in from the side. Nate swung the rifle, but too slow. The wolf lunged straight for Sarah, jaws open wide. Emma did not think, did not pray, did not hesitate. She raised the revolver Nate had given her and pulled the trigger. The sound in the enclosed cave was deafening. The bullet caught the wolf in the shoulder, spinning it sideways. It yelped and scrambled back, blood staining the snow at the cave entrance. The pack hesitated. Nate used the moment, firing twice more into the ground in front of the alpha, sending up explosions of frozen earth. "Go!" he shouted. "Get out!" For a long moment, man and wolf stared at each other. Then the alpha turned and melted into the darkness. The pack followed, disappearing as quickly as they had appeared. Emma stood frozen, the gun still raised, smoke curling from the barrel. She had just shot a living creature, had pulled the trigger and sent a bullet into flesh and bone, had felt nothing in that moment but the need to protect. Her hands started shaking, then her arms, then her whole body. Nate gently took the gun from her trembling fingers. "You did good, sister. You saved her. I shot it, and I didn't even think." "That's how it works. When it matters, you don't think. You just act." He guided her to sit down by the fire. Emma stared at her hands, these hands that had held rosary beads and tended wounds, and now had pulled a trigger to cause harm. Was this who she was becoming? Was this what survival required? Sarah was crying, holding Ethan tight. Thank you, Sister Emma." But Emma barely heard. She was remembering the moment, the decision that was not a decision, the way her body had moved before her mind could object, the wolf's eyes meeting hers in the instant before the bullet struck. She had crossed a line. Not the line between good and evil, perhaps, but the line between passive and active, between prayer and action, between the woman who hid in a convent and the woman who fought back when threatened. There was no going back across that line. Emma understood that with crystalline clarity. She could never again be the quiet nun who knelt in chapel and pretended the world's violence did not exist. She had participated in it now, had become part of it. The question was whether that made her stronger or simply more damaged. Nate sat beside her close but not touching, respecting the distance she might need. "First time is hardest." "There shouldn't be a first time. I'm supposed to be a woman of God." "You are. You just proved it. You protected the innocent. That's more godly than any prayer." Emma looked at him, this man who had killed and run and hidden, now trying to comfort her. "Does it get easier?" "The shooting." "Yes." He paused, and his voice was heavy with experience. "Living with it after, no. It never gets easier. You just learn to carry it." They sat in silence as the fire crackled and the mountain night pressed in around them. Outside the wolves were gone, but Emma could still feel their presence, still see those mirror eyes in the darkness. "Tell me something," she said quietly. "Tell me something good, something from before all this." Nate was quiet for so long she thought he would not answer. Then softly he spoke. "My father used to take me fishing, up in the high country where the streams run clear and cold. We'd spend whole days up there, just the two of us. He'd tell me about the mountains, about reading the weather and the clouds, about knowing when to be still and when to move. Said the wilderness would teach me more than any schoolroom ever could." He paused, lost in memory. "He was right. Everything I know about surviving out here I learned from him. Everything about being patient, about waiting for the right moment, about knowing when to fight and when to let go." Emma saw the weight of loss in his eyes. "You miss him?" "Every day." Nate's voice was barely audible. "Especially when I'm making decisions I know would disappoint him." "He'd be proud of what you're doing now," Emma said. "Coming forward, telling the truth." Nate looked at her, hope and doubt warring in his expression. "I'd like to think so." They rested in the cave until midnight, then pushed on through the darkness. The wolves did not return, but as they walked, Emma could not shake the feeling that they were still being watched, still being hunted. Not by animals, but by something more dangerous. By men with guns and orders and no conscience to slow them down. At dawn they crested a ridge and saw Springfield Hollow spread out in the valley below. Smoke rose from chimneys. Church bells rang for morning mass. It looked peaceful, normal. A place where justice still meant something, where the law still protected the innocent. Emma knew it was an illusion. Blackwell's influence reached everywhere. His money corrupted everything. But Sheriff Wade Carson was supposed to be different, supposed to be honest, supposed to be the one man in 3 counties who could not be bought. They would find out soon enough if that was true. "Almost there," Nate said, but his voice held no relief. They started down the slope, moving carefully on the icy ground. Emma's heart lifted despite her exhaustion. They had made it. Against all odds, through storm and wolves and murderous pursuit, they had made it. They were maybe a mile from town when Nate stopped so suddenly that Emma nearly ran into him. "What is it?" He pointed. There, blocking the trail ahead, were 4 men on horseback. Even from a distance, Emma could see the guns. The lead rider, a big man with a scar running down his face, urged his horse forward. His voice carried clearly in the cold air, and Emma recognized it. Cole Turner, the man who had cut the cable, the man who had chased them through the storm, the man who would kill them all without hesitation or remorse. "That's far enough, Collier. We know it's you." Emma felt ice form in her stomach. 4 armed men, one of Nate, and she had a gun with 5 bullets left and hands that still shook when she thought about the wolf. This was where it ended, she thought. This close to safety, this close to justice, and this was where Silas Blackwell's long arm would finally reach them, unless they were willing to fight back. Cole Turner sat astride his horse like a man who had done this before, who had hunted people through these mountains and always caught them in the end. The scar that ran down his face twisted as he smiled, turning the expression into something predatory and cruel. Behind him, his 3 companions spread out in a practiced formation, cutting off any route of escape. "Boss wants the boy," Turner called out, his voice conversational, almost friendly. "Give him to us, we'll let you walk away. Quick and clean. You got my word on that." Nate's hand moved to his rifle, but he did not raise it yet. Emma could see him calculating angles and distances, weighing their chances. 4 against 1. Even with the element of surprise, even with his skill, the odds were impossible. "We both know that's a lie," Nate called back. Turner's smile widened. "Yeah, but I had to try. Makes me feel civilized, you know, giving folks a choice before killing them." He raised his hand, and the other 3 men began to move horses, stepping carefully through the snow, forming a tightening circle. In minutes they would be surrounded, trapped between armed killers and the steep slope behind them. Emma felt Ethan trembling against her back, his small hands clutching her torn habit. Sarah stood frozen beside her, all the color drained from her face. They had come so far, survived so much, only to end here in the snow so close to safety they could see the smoke from Springfield Hollow's chimneys. Nate spoke quietly, his voice meant only for Emma's ears. "When I start shooting, you run. Don't look back. Get Ethan to town. Find Sheriff Carson. Tell him everything. I'm not leaving you. You don't have a choice." Then everything happened at once. Nate raised his rifle and fired in one smooth motion. The shot took Turner's horse in the shoulder, not a killing shot, but enough to make the animal rear violently. Turner tumbled backward, hitting the snow hard, his own gun flying from his grip. The other 3 men went for their weapons. Nate was already moving, running toward a cluster of boulders that offered cover, firing again as he moved. One of Turner's men screamed and grabbed his arm, blood spraying across white snow. Emma grabbed Ethan and ran. Sarah was right behind her, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Gunfire erupted behind them, bullets kicking up snow and dirt, the sounds overlapping until it became a continuous roar. She heard men shouting, horses screaming. Behind her, Nate was fighting 3 to 1, and she was running away. Every instinct screamed at her to go back to help, to do something. But Ethan's weight on her back and Sarah's desperate pace beside her drove her forward. They made it maybe 50 yards before one of Turner's men cut them off. He was young, maybe 20, with scared eyes and a shaking gun pointed right at Ethan. His horse danced nervously beneath him, sensing his rider's fear. Everything about him screamed inexperience, uncertainty, someone who had taken this job for the money without fully understanding what it would require. "Stop," his voice cracked on the word. "Stop or I shoot." Emma stopped. Sarah whimpered. Ethan trembled against her back, and she could feel his tears soaking through the fabric of her habit. The young gunman looked uncertain, the pistol wavering in his grip. "I don't want to hurt nobody. But Turner said bring the boy, said Mr. Blackwell needs him dealt with." "Please," Sarah begged, her voice breaking. "He's just a child." "I know. I'm sorry." The young man actually looked sorry, his face twisted with genuine distress, but the gun remained pointed at them. "I got family, got debts. Blackwell pays good money, and if I don't do this, Turner'll kill me himself." He dismounted, taking a step closer, reaching for Ethan with his free hand. And Emma knew with absolute certainty, that if she let him take the boy, Ethan would never be seen alive again. Blackwell could not afford a witness. could not afford mercy. The moment this young man took Ethan, the boy's fate was sealed. The revolver was heavy in Emma's pocket, the weight of it suddenly impossible to ignore. She pulled it out before she could think about it, before her conscious mind could object or hesitate or remember that she was supposed to be a woman of God who did not point weapons at frightened young men just trying to survive. The gunman's eyes went wide. "Don't. Please, ma'am. I don't want to die." "Then leave," Emma said, and her voice was steady despite the terror coursing through her. "Ride away right now and don't look back." His gun shook worse. "I can't. Turner will kill me. I'll kill you if you touch this boy." For a heartbeat they stood frozen. Two people who had never wanted to be in this position, forced by circumstance and the machinations of powerful men into a confrontation neither desired. Two people who in another world might have passed each other on the street with a polite nod. Then the young man made his choice. He started to raise his gun, his face showing the decision had already cost him something essential. Emma pulled the trigger. The bullet took him in the shoulder, spinning him around. He dropped his gun and fell clutching the wound, screaming. Emma stood there, smoke curling from the barrel, and felt something inside her break, or maybe complete. She was not sure anymore which it was. Behind them the gunfire had stopped. Emma turned to see Nate walking toward them, blood on his sleeve but alive. Two bodies lay in the snow behind him. Turner was nowhere to be seen. Nate looked at the wounded young man, then at Emma. "You all right?" She nodded, not trusting her voice. That was the third time. 3 times in less than a week she had pulled a trigger. 3 times she had sent metal into flesh. The nun who had arrived at this cabin 4 days ago would not have recognized the woman she had become. Nate knelt beside the young gunman who was crying now, clutching his shoulder. "You're lucky, boy. Sister Emma could have killed you. Shows mercy you don't deserve. Please, I need a doctor. You'll get one in Springfield, after you tell the sheriff everything you know about Blackwell's operation." Nate stood, his voice hardening. "Can you walk?" The young man nodded. "Then start walking. We'll be right behind you." They continued toward Springfield, their unlikely group now including a wounded hired gun who sobbed with every step. The sun was fully up now, bright and cold. In the distance, Emma could see people moving in the streets of the town, going about their morning routines, unaware of the violence that had just unfolded in the hills above them. Sheriff Wade Carson's office sat on Main Street, a solid brick building with barred windows and a sign that had seen better days. Emma had never been inside, had only passed it on her rare visits to Springfield with Mother Constance. Now as they approached the door she felt her heart hammering against her ribs. Everything depended on this man. If Carson was in Blackwell's pocket like so many others, they were finished. If he could be bought or intimidated, Ethan would die, and Emma and Sarah and Nate would follow shortly after. Their entire desperate journey, all the violence and fear and loss, would mean nothing. Nate knocked his bloodied knuckles, leaving small red marks on the wood. The door opened, and a man appeared, middle-aged and weathered with gray at his temples and the careful eyes of someone who had learned not to trust appearances. Sheriff Wade Carson held a revolver in one hand, pointed at the floor, but ready to rise at the first sign of trouble. His eyes swept over them, taking in the bloodstains and torn clothing, the wounded gunman, the frightened widow and child, the nun in a shredded habit holding a gun like she knew how to use it. For a long moment he said nothing, just studied them with the intensity of a man reading a book in a language he was still learning. "In God's name," he said finally, "what happened to you people?" Emma found her voice surprised by how steady it sounded. "We need help, Sheriff. We need protection, and we have information about Silas Blackwell." Carson's eyes sharpened at the name. He looked at each of them again, his gaze lingering longest on Nate as if trying to place a face he half remembered from somewhere. "Inside. Now, before someone sees you and word gets to Blackwell." The office was small but clean, with a wood stove throwing heat and wanted posters covering one wall. Carson gestured the wounded gunman to a chair, then turned his full attention to Emma. "You first, sister. Start from the beginning and don't leave anything out." So Emma told it all. Ethan witnessing the cable being cut, Cole Turner and the 3 dead miners, running to the convent, Mother Constance sending them over the mountain, the chase through the storm, Nate saving them, the journey to Springfield, the ambush that had just happened in the hills. She did not mention Nate's past, not yet. That was his story to tell, his burden to share. But she told everything else, every detail she could remember, painting a picture of systematic murder covered up as accidents of a man so drunk on power he thought himself untouchable. When she finished, Carson sat back in his chair and was silent for a long moment. Then he looked at Ethan. "Son, can you tell me what you saw?" Ethan's voice was small but clear. "I saw it, sir. I saw Mr. Turner cut the cable. I watched it fall. I heard the men screaming when they hit bottom." The wounded gunman groaned from his chair. "It's true, all of it. Blackwell pays us to keep the miners scared, keep them from organizing. Turner's done it before, lots of times. Boss don't care how many die as long as profit stays high." Carson turned his attention to Nate, and his eyes narrowed with recognition. "I know you. Took me a minute, but I know your face. You're Nathaniel Collier, wanted for the Grace killings 6 years back." Nate did not flinch. "Yes, sir, I am. You're under arrest." "I know." Nate stepped forward, hands out for the cuffs he knew were coming. "But before you lock me up, you need to know something. Silas Blackwell ordered those killings. He's been ordering killings for years. I can testify to all of it. Names, dates, locations. I kept records." Carson studied him for a long moment. "Why now? Why come forward after 6 years?" Nate glanced at Emma, and something passed between them. Understanding, perhaps, or just shared exhaustion and the recognition that they had come too far to turn back now. "Because I'm tired of running," Nate said simply, "and because these people deserve justice more than I deserve to hide." Carson was quiet, thinking. His eyes moved from Nate to Emma to Ethan to the wounded gunman bleeding on his floor. Finally he stood. "Here's how this is going to work. Collier, you're technically under arrest, but I'm not putting you in a cell yet. I need you alive to testify, and if Blackwell finds out you're here, he'll send every gun he's got. Sister, you and the boy and his mother are under my protection. Nobody touches you." "What about Blackwell?" Emma asked. "That's the problem." Carson moved to the window, looking out at the quiet street. "He's got lawyers' money influence. Your word against his, even with these 2 testifying, might not be enough. I need evidence, hard evidence, financial records, communications, something that ties him directly to these crimes." Nate spoke up. "I know where they are. His office. There's a safe behind a painting of his father. He keeps everything there. Thinks he's untouchable, so he never destroys anything. Every order, every payment, every murder. It's all there." "Can't get a warrant without probable cause," Carson said. "And Judge Reed is in Blackwell's pocket anyway. He'd tip Blackwell off the moment I filed the paperwork." Emma felt frustration rising. "So we just wait while he sends more men, while more people die." Carson turned from the window, and for the first time Emma saw something that might have been a smile. "I didn't say we wouldn't get that evidence, sister. I just said I can't get a warrant. Big difference." He looked at Nate. "You know the layout of Blackwell's house?" "I do. Worked security for him for 8 months before everything went wrong. Know every entrance, every room where he keeps his valuables. Then we get creative." Carson pulled a bottle of whiskey from his desk drawer. "But first, let me get Doc Hayes to look at all of you. You look half dead." Dr. Samuel Hayes arrived within the hour, a tired man with gentle hands and the resigned air of someone who had seen too many mining accidents and not enough healing. He examined Ethan first, nodding approval at Emma's work. "You did well, sister. The boy will be fine. Keep the wound clean, change the dressing daily, watch for fever." He moved to Nate next, who had been shot in the upper arm during the ambush. The bullet had passed through cleanly, but the wound needed stitching. Doc Hayes threaded his needle with practiced efficiency. "This is going to hurt." "I've had worse," Nate said, his voice flat. As the doctor worked, Emma watched Nate's face. He did not flinch, did not make a sound, just stared at the far wall with the stoic acceptance of a man who believed he deserved the pain. Each pull of the thread through torn flesh was a small penance, one more payment toward a debt that could never be fully repaid. "You were lucky," Doc Hayes said as he tied off the last stitch. "Another inch to the left and you'd have bled out in those mountains." "Luck seems to be following me lately," Nate replied, his eyes finding Emma's again. After the doctor left, Carson spread a map of Springfield Hollow on his desk. "Here's the situation. It's Sunday tomorrow. Whole town will be at church for morning service. That includes Blackwell. He's nothing if not consistent about appearances." "You're thinking we make our move during church?" Emma asked. "I'm thinking we make our stand during church. Public open, everyone watching. We lay out what we know, let people hear the truth directly from witnesses, force Blackwell to react in front of the whole town." Nate shook his head. "He'll have men there, armed men. Could turn into a bloodbath." "Could," Carson agreed. "Or it could be exactly what this town needs. People have been afraid of Blackwell for too long. Maybe it's time they saw someone stand up to him." Emma thought of Mother Constance's words. "Faith is action." Sometimes it was putting one foot in front of another when you were afraid. Sometimes it was standing in a church and speaking truth to power, even when that power had the money and guns to silence you. "I'll do it," she said. "I'll testify." "So will I," Sarah added quietly. Ethan's small voice joined them. "Me too." Carson looked at the unlikely group of witnesses, something like pride crossing his weathered face. "Then we better make sure you survive to do it." That evening, as the sun set over Springfield Hollow, painting the snow in shades of amber and gold, word spread through the town. Whispered conversations in the general store, hushed exchanges on street corners. By nightfall, everyone knew that something was coming, that tomorrow's church service would be different, that the long silence was about to end. In his house on the hill, Silas Blackwell received the news from Cole Turner, who had finally made his way back to town, bruised and furious from his fall. They made it to Carson. Turner reported his scarred face dark with anger. "All of them. The woman, the kid, Collier. And Billy Marsh is singing like a canary, telling everything he knows." Blackwell sat behind his massive oak desk. Fingers steepled his expression, unreadable. He was 48 years old, silver-haired and well-dressed, a man who had built an empire on knowing when to be charming and when to be ruthless. Right now, ruthless was required. "Collier," he said softly. "I should have killed him 6 years ago. Should have known he'd keep records insurance against me. That was always his way, paranoid and careful." "What do you want me to do, boss?" Blackwell was silent for a long moment, thinking through options and consequences. Finally, he looked up at Turner. "Tomorrow morning you take 20 men to that church. I don't care what Carson says or who's watching. The boy dies. The woman dies. Collier dies. All of them. And if Carson tries to stop you, he dies too." Turner smiled, the scar pulling his face into something inhuman. "Yes, sir. Be a pleasure." After Turner left, Blackwell stood and walked to the window. Springfield Hollow spread out below him, lights beginning to appear in windows as families settled in for the evening. His town, his mine, his people. He had built all of this from nothing, starting as a poor miner himself, working his way up through intelligence and ruthlessness, and an absolute refusal to let sentiment interfere with profit. He thought of Samuel Grace, the idealist who had tried to organize the workers. Thought of the others who had challenged him over the years, all now dead or broken or driven away. Thought of this new challenge, a nun and a widow and a child and a man he should have killed years ago. They would die like all the others, and Springfield Hollow would go back to being quiet and profitable and his. He did not doubt this, could not afford to doubt it, because the moment he showed weakness, the moment he let anyone challenge him successfully, his entire empire would crumble. Fear was the foundation of everything he had built. Let that foundation crack, and the whole structure would collapse. So they would die. All of them. Tomorrow. Sunday morning dawned clear and cold. Emma woke in the small room behind Carson's temporary office. her body aching from days of running and fighting and fear. She dressed in the simple black dress Mrs. Margaret Stone had brought her, since her habit was beyond repair. Her hair, freed from the confines of the veil, hung loose around her shoulders. She barely recognized herself in the small mirror. Was she still a nun? Could she still claim that identity after everything she had done, after the bullets she had fired and the violence she had participated in, after choosing action over contemplation, justice over forgiveness? She did not know. Perhaps she would never know. Perhaps some questions had no answers, only the living with uncertainty that came after. Nate was waiting outside, dressed in clean clothes borrowed from Carson, his wounded arm in a sling. He looked almost civilized except for his eyes. Those still held the haunted look of a man expecting to die who had made peace with that expectation and was simply waiting for it to arrive. "Ready?" he asked. Emma surprised herself by answering honestly. "No, but I don't think anyone's ever ready to face their fear. They just do it anyway." "That's courage, Sister Emma. Or foolishness. Sometimes they're the same thing." They walked to the church as a group, Emma and Sarah and Ethan in the middle, Nate and Carson flanking them. People were already gathering more than usual for a Sunday service. Word had spread that something was happening, that today would be different. Some came out of curiosity, others out of hope, a few out of the desperate need to finally see justice done. The church was packed by the time they arrived. Emma saw faces she recognized from her occasional trips to Springfield with Mother Constance, saw fear and curiosity, and on some faces anger that had been buried too long under layers of caution and self-preservation. And there at the back near the door stood Silas Blackwell and his men. Emma's first thought was that he looked smaller than she had imagined. For 6 years she had built him up in her mind into something monstrous, inhuman, a force of pure evil. But standing there in his expensive suit with his silver hair and cold eyes, he was just a man. Powerful, yes. Dangerous, certainly. But still just a man, which meant he could be stopped. His eyes found hers across the crowded church, and he smiled. It was not a pleasant smile. It was the smile of a man who held all the cards, who knew how this game would end, and who was simply enjoying the last moments before his inevitable victory. Emma felt something harden in her chest. She had come too far, lost too much, changed too fundamentally to back down now. If Blackwell wanted a fight, he would get one. Reverend Thomas was midway through his sermon when Sheriff Carson stood up. The elderly reverend paused, confusion and concern crossing his lined face. "Reverend," Carson said, his voice carrying clearly through the packed church, "I apologize for interrupting, but there's something this congregation needs to hear, something that can't wait." "Sheriff Carson, this is highly irregular. So is murder, Reverend, and this town has been turning a blind eye to it for too long." A murmur ran through the congregation. Blackwell's smile faded slightly. His hand moved closer to his coat, where Emma knew he carried a gun. Carson gestured to Emma. "Sister Emma Grace has something to say. I think you all should listen." Emma stood on shaking legs. Every eye in the church was on her. She had never spoken in front of so many people, never thought she would need to. But she thought of her father, thought of Ethan, thought of all the families destroyed by one man's greed. She walked to the front of the church and turned to face them all. Her voice started barely above a whisper, then grew stronger with each word. "My name is Emma Grace. My father was Samuel Grace. He died 6 years ago in what you were told was an accident during a strike at Blackwell's mine. That was a lie." The murmur grew louder. Blackwell stood, his face dark. "This is slander, Sheriff. I demand you stop this." "Sit down, Blackwell." Carson set his hand on his gun. "Let her speak." Emma continued, her voice gaining strength. "My father was murdered by men hired by Silas Blackwell to break the strike. 3 other men died that night. Since then, how many more have died? How many accidents that weren't accidents? How many families destroyed while we all stayed silent?" She pointed at Ethan. "This child witnessed Blackwell's man Cole Turner cutting a cable that killed 3 miners 4 days ago. They've been hunting us ever since, trying to silence the truth. But we're here now, we're speaking, and we're asking you, all of you, how long will you let fear keep you silent?" The church was utterly quiet now. Then slowly Margaret Stone stood up. "My brother died in a cave-in 3 years ago. They said it was bad luck. But I knew. I saw the support beams. They'd been cut to save money on materials." Another person stood. Then another. One by one, people began to rise, began to speak. Years of buried grief and rage came pouring out. Wives talking about husbands who died in accidents. Minors talking about safety violations they were ordered to ignore. Children talking about fathers who never came home. Blackwell's face went from dark to pale. He turned to leave, but Carson was there blocking the door. "You're not going anywhere, Blackwell. These people have the right to be heard." "You have no authority to hold me?" "Actually, I do. Based on the testimony of multiple witnesses, I'm placing you under arrest for murder conspiracy to commit murder and about a dozen other charges." Blackwell's men reached for their guns. Carson's hand tightened on his. The moment hung there, balanced on a knife's edge. 20 guns against maybe 10 if the townspeople were counted. Even if Carson's side won, people would die. The church floor would run red with blood. Then Nate stood up. His voice cut through the tension like a blade. "Don't. It's over." Blackwell's eyes found him and recognition sparked. "Collier, you're supposed to be dead." "I was. For 6 years I was dead." Nate walked forward slowly, hands visible and empty. "But I'm back now to tell the truth. You ordered the attack on the Grace home. You ordered the cable cuts. You ordered it all. And I kept records. Every order, every payment, every death. It's all written down. Names, dates, amounts. Everything you thought you'd buried is documented. No one will believe a wanted criminal. They'll believe 20 witnesses. They'll believe the financial records in your safe. They'll believe their own eyes when they see what you really are." Blackwell looked around the church, saw the faces watching him, saw his power crumbling. His hand moved toward his gun, and Emma saw the decision in his eyes. He would not go quietly, would not surrender, would kill as many as he could before they brought him down. Emma pulled the revolver from her pocket and aimed it at his chest. Her hands were steady now, the shaking gone. She had pulled this trigger 3 times already. A 4th time would be easy. "Don't," she said quietly. "Please don't make me do this." Blackwell froze, staring down the barrel of her gun. For the first time Emma saw fear in his eyes. Real fear. The fear of a man who had always believed himself untouchable, finally realizing he was mortal after all. "Put it down, Blackwell," Carson ordered. "All of you. This ends now." For a long, terrible moment, no one moved. The church held its breath. Emma's finger rested on the trigger, ready to pull if she had to, ready to kill a man in God's house if that was what protecting Ethan required. Then slowly, reluctantly, Blackwell raised his hands. It was over. The arrest happened quickly after that. Carson and his deputies, including several townsmen who volunteered on the spot, disarmed Blackwell's men and placed them in custody. Cole Turner tried to fight, but 3 miners tackled him before he could draw his gun. The violence they had all expected, the bloodbath that seemed inevitable, never materialized. Sometimes Emma thought the simple act of standing up to evil was enough to deflate it. Sometimes bullies backed down when their bluff was called, but she knew this was just the beginning. Blackwell would have lawyers, would fight the charges, would use every resource at his disposal to avoid justice. The real battle was yet to come. "We need that evidence," Carson said as they stood outside the church watching deputies lead prisoners away. "Everything he's got in that safe. Without it, a good lawyer might get him off." "I can get it," Nate said. "Tonight, while he's locked up. I know the house know where everything is." "That's illegal entry." "So was burning down your office to free him." Carson considered this. If someone were to hypothetically break into Blackwell's house and retrieve evidence of crimes, and that evidence were to hypothetically end up on my desk, I would be duty-bound to investigate. Nate smiled grimly. "Hypothetically, of course." "I'm going with you," Emma said immediately. "Sister Emma, it's too dangerous." "So is everything else we've done. Besides, you'll need someone to watch your back, and I'm getting quite good with a gun, apparently." Nate looked like he wanted to argue, but something in her expression stopped him. They had come this far together. She would not let him face the last danger alone. That night, as darkness fell over Springfield Hollow, Emma found herself in the back room of Ezra Stone's general store, changing out of her dress and into men's work clothes. Mrs. Stone had provided them without question, along with a dark coat and a cap to hide Emma's hair. "You look like a young man," Mrs. Stone said approvingly. "Might help if you run into trouble." She pressed something into Emma's hand. A small derringer, the kind wealthy women carried in their purses. Emma started to protest, then stopped. She was past the point of pretending she would not use a weapon if she had to. "Thank you." Nate was waiting outside, dressed all in black, a coil of rope over his shoulder and his rifle slung across his back despite his wounded arm. They moved through the dark streets like ghosts keeping to shadows. Blackwell's house sat on a hill overlooking the town, a monument to wealth built on blood. Lights burned in several windows. Emma counted at least 3 guards patrolling the grounds, probably more inside. "How do we get past them?" she whispered. Nate studied the house for a long moment, then pointed to a large oak tree whose branches overhung a second-story balcony. "We go over." They circled wide through the woods until they were behind the house, then approached the oak tree. Nate went up first, moving with surprising grace for a man with an injured arm. Emma followed more awkwardly, grateful for the trousers that let her climb without tangling in skirts. The branch creaked under their combined weight as they inched toward the balcony. Below, a guard passed, lantern swinging. Emma held her breath until he was gone. Nate dropped lightly onto the balcony and helped Emma down. The French doors were locked, but Nate produced a thin piece of metal and worked it into the mechanism. 30 seconds later, they were inside. The house was opulent in a way that made Emma's stomach turn. Persian rugs, crystal chandeliers, furniture that cost more than most miners made in a year. All of it bought with blood and suffering and the systematic crushing of anyone who dared to challenge the man who owned it. They crept through hallways, Nate leading the way with the confidence of someone who had been here before. The office was on the first floor behind a heavy oak door. Nate tried the handle. Locked. "Can you pick it?" He shook his head. "Not this one. It's a deadbolt." He looked around, then gestured to a window. "We need to break it." "That'll bring the guards." "I know. Which means we'll have about 2 minutes to get the safe open and get out." "Ready." Emma drew the derringer Mrs. Stone had given her. "As I'll ever be." Nate wrapped his coat around his elbow and drove it through the window. Glass shattered impossibly loud in the quiet house. Shouts erupted immediately from downstairs. Heavy footsteps pounded upstairs. They had seconds, not minutes. They climbed through the window into Blackwell's office. Nate went straight to the painting on the far wall, a portrait of a stern-looking man. He ripped it down, revealing the safe behind it. "Watch the door," he ordered, already working the combination. Emma positioned herself by the office door, derringer raised. Her heart hammered, but her hands were steady. She had shot 3 people in the past week. A 4th would be easier. The thought should have horrified her. Instead, it simply was. Footsteps thundered up the stairs, voices shouting coordinates. The door handle rattled. Someone was trying to get in. "Nate, hurry." "Almost got it." The door burst open. A guard stood there, gun raised, his eyes widening when he saw them. Emma did not hesitate. She fired. The derringer's crack was shockingly loud. The bullet caught the guard high in the shoulder, spinning him around. He fell backward into the hallway, his own gun clattering to the floor unfired. Emma stood frozen, smoke curling from the small pistol. That was the 3rd time. 3 times in less than a week she had pulled a trigger. 3 times she had sent metal into flesh. Who was she now? What had she become? Nate grabbed her arm, a canvas bag clutched against his chest, stuffed full of papers and ledgers. "Move." They ran for the window, but more footsteps were pounding up the stairs. Too many. They would never make it back to the balcony. Nate changed direction, pulling Emma down a different hallway. Behind them, men shouted. A gunshot splintered the doorframe beside Emma's head, sending wooden splinters flying. They burst through a door into what looked like a library, walls lined with leather-bound books Blackwell probably never read. Nate slammed the door and shoved a heavy desk in front of it. "That won't hold long," Emma gasped. "Doesn't have to." Nate was already at the far wall, running his hands along the paneling, searching for something. "Blackwell's paranoid. Showed me once when he was drunk. There's a passage, secret way out in case of fire or attack. It's here somewhere." Bodies slammed against the door. The desk scraped forward an inch, 2 inches. Wood cracked under the assault. "Nate, they're coming through." His fingers found something. A click. A section of the bookshelf swung inward, revealing darkness beyond. "Go." Emma plunged into the passage, Nate right behind her, pulling the shelf closed just as the library door burst open. She heard muffled cursing on the other side, furniture being overturned as they searched, but they had not seen the passage close. The darkness was absolute. Emma could not see her own hand in front of her face. She felt Nate's hand on her shoulder, guiding her forward. "Stairs," he whispered. "Watch your step." They descended carefully, the stone steps worn smooth by decades of use. The passage smelled of earth and old stone, reminding Emma of the convent's root cellar. How long ago that seemed now. How different she had been. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only minutes, they saw faint light ahead. The passage ended at a wooden door slightly ajar. Beyond it, Emma could see grass and moonlight. They emerged into a small ravine behind Blackwell's property, hidden from the house by a stand of pine trees. From the hilltop came shouts and the glow of lanterns as guards searched the grounds. "We need to get these documents to Carson," Nate said, clutching the bag, "before Blackwell realizes what we took and comes after us." They ran through the darkness, keeping low, using every shadow. Emma's lungs burned, her legs ached, but she kept moving, driven by the knowledge that in Nate's bag might be the proof they needed to end this. Carson's temporary office was dark when they arrived. Emma pounded on the door until a sleepy-looking Carson appeared, gun in hand. "Please tell me you didn't do what I think you did." Nate shoved the bag at him. "Hypothetically, if someone broke into Blackwell's house and took these from his safe, you'd want to look at them, right?" Carson took the bag, his expression torn between exasperation and hope. He dumped the contents onto his makeshift desk. Ledgers, letters, financial records. He began reading, his face growing darker with each page. "This is it," he breathed. "This is everything. Payments to Turner going back 8 years, orders for specific jobs, even a letter from Judge Reed discussing how to handle troublesome witnesses." He looked up at them, something like awe in his expression. "You did it. This will bury him." Emma felt relief wash over her, so strong her knees nearly gave out. They had done it. Against all odds, through violence and fear and exhaustion, they had done it. But the relief was short-lived. Because even as Carson spread the documents across his desk, even as he began making notes for the prosecutor, Emma knew this was not over. Blackwell was in a cell, but he still had resources, still had influence. The trial would be brutal. The fight was far from finished. And somewhere in the night, Cole Turner was still free, still dangerous, still loyal to a man who would pay any price to see his enemies dead. The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of preparation. Carson sent copies of the most damaging documents to the Territorial Capital Insurance against Blackwell, destroying the originals. A territorial prosecutor arrived, a stern woman named Elizabeth Crawford, who had made her career going after corrupt mine owners. She interviewed each witness multiple times, building an ironclad case. Emma, Sarah, and Ethan stayed under Carson's protection, moving between safe houses. Nate remained technically under arrest, but free on his own recognizance, his cooperation too valuable to risk losing him to a jail cell where Blackwell's remaining men might reach him. The trial was held in the Territorial Capital, 3 days' journey from Springfield Hollow. Emma testified first, telling the story of her father's death and the evidence she had found in Nate's cabin. Sarah testified next, describing the systematic intimidation of workers. Ethan took the stand, small and frightened but clear in his account of what he had seen. Cole Turner, captured trying to flee to Kansas, cut a deal. In exchange for a reduced sentence, he testified in excruciating detail about every job Blackwell had ordered, every murder disguised as accident, every threat and bribe and corruption. And finally, Nate testified. He sat in the witness box for an entire day, walking the court through 6 years of evidence, naming names and dates and amounts. He confessed his own role, accepting responsibility for the Grace killings while making clear they had been ordered by Blackwell. His voice never wavered, never tried to minimize his own guilt or shift blame. He simply told the truth, all of it, and accepted whatever judgment came. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. Guilty on all counts. Life in prison without possibility of parole. Emma sat in the courtroom and watched justice finally being served. Her father's death was officially acknowledged as murder. The other victims were recognized. Their families were vindicated. It did not bring anyone back, but it mattered. After the trial, as they prepared to return to Springfield Hollow, the territorial prosecutor approached Nate. "Based on the testimony we've collected and the evidence from Blackwell's files, it's clear you were following orders. You're guilty of being present, maybe of poor judgment, but the actual killings were done by other men, most of whom are dead now. Cole Turner's willing to testify that Blackwell gave specific kill orders, which you refused." Nate's eyes widened slightly. "That's not entirely accurate." "It's accurate enough." Crawford's voice was firm. "Look, Collier, I've been a prosecutor for 20 years. I know the difference between a killer and a man who made mistakes. You made mistakes, bad ones. But you've also spent 6 years punishing yourself, and then you risked everything to bring down Blackwell. In my book, that counts for something." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I'm prepared to offer a deal. You testify against anyone else we find who was involved in Blackwell's operations. In exchange, time served in the form of your 6 years in exile plus 2 years probation. No jail time." Nate stared at her. "Why would you do that?" "Because we need men who know the difference between justice and revenge. Because this territory is trying to become civilized, and we need people willing to stand up for what's right even when it costs them." Crawford extended her hand. "What do you say?" Nate looked at Emma. She nodded, tears streaming down her face, smiling despite everything. He shook Crawford's hand. "I say yes, and thank you." 6 months passed. Summer came to the Ozarks, turning the mountains green and filling the valleys with wildflowers. Springfield Hollow had changed in ways both visible and subtle. The mine operated under new management, now a cooperative owned partly by the territory and partly by the miners themselves. Safety standards had been implemented, fair wages paid. There had not been a single accident in 4 months. Emma Grace stood at the window of the small schoolhouse watching her students play during recess. 23 children, ranging from 6 to 14 children of miners and shopkeepers and farmers. She had been teaching them for 5 months now, and to her surprise, she loved it. This was her calling, she had realized. Not prayers in a quiet chapel, but helping young minds grow and question and learn. Not hiding from the world, but engaging with it, shaping it, making it better, one child at a time. "Miss Grace," Ethan came running up his leg, fully healed. "Tommy Chin said the earth goes around the sun, but I said the sun goes around the earth. Who's right?" Emma smiled. "What do you think, Ethan? What does the evidence suggest?" She had learned to teach with questions, not answers, to help them find truth for themselves rather than simply accepting what they were told. After school ended, Emma tidied the classroom and prepared lessons for tomorrow. She was halfway through writing out arithmetic problems when a knock came at the door. Nate Collier stood in the doorway, his deputy marshal badge gleaming on his chest. He had filled out some since taking the job, no longer carrying the gaunt, haunted look of a man slowly dying. His beard was neatly trimmed, now his eyes clear. "Deputy Collier," Emma said, unable to keep from smiling. "What brings you by?" "Official business," he said, but his eyes were warm. "Marshal Crawford needs someone to ride out to the Henderson place tomorrow. Some dispute about property boundaries. Wondered if you'd like to come along. Purely educational, of course. Show you how we handle civil matters." They had fallen into this pattern over the past months. Careful, respectful, taking their time. Nate would find excuses to stop by the schoolhouse. Emma would find reasons to visit the marshal's office. They would have dinner at the hotel restaurant on Sundays, always in public, always proper. But something was building between them, something neither of them had quite put into words yet. "What time?" Emma asked. "Dawn. We'll be back by afternoon." "I'll be ready." After Nate left, Emma walked to the small house she rented on the edge of town. It was not much, just 2 rooms, but it was hers, her independence, her new life. She thought about Nate's invitation, thought about the way he looked at her, the careful distance he maintained as if afraid she might break. Thought about her own feelings, complicated and confusing, and somehow right despite everything. He was a good man who had done bad things. She was a former nun who had discovered she had a warrior's heart. Together, they were something neither of them quite understood yet. But they had time. For the first time in either of their lives, they had time. 1 year later, on a crisp autumn morning, very much like the evening they had first spoken of the future, Emma Grace and Nate Collier stood before Reverend Thomas in the small church where everything had changed. The same church where truth had been spoken, where justice had begun. Now it bore witness to something else. A beginning instead of an ending. A promise instead of a reckoning. Emma wore cream with wildflowers in her hair. Nate wore his marshal's badge. The church was packed with miners and their families' townspeople. Sarah sat in the front row with Ethan beside her new husband, Thomas Beck, a kind miner who had courted her slowly and patiently over the past months, treating Ethan like his own son. And in the back, by special arrangement, several nuns from St. Agnes Convent. Mother Constance in the center, her old face wreathed in smiles. As Reverend Thomas began the ceremony, Emma looked at Nate and saw her future, saw the children they might have, the life they would build, the good they could do together. But she also saw the past, saw her father's face, saw the girl she had been kneeling in prayer seeking answers, saw the journey that had brought her here through darkness and blood and fear, and finally into light. "Do you, Emma Mary Grace, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" Emma smiled. "I do." "And do you, Nathaniel James Collier, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" Nate's voice was strong, sure. "I do." "Then by the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride." Nate kissed her gently, reverently, as if she were something precious and fragile. The congregation erupted in applause. As they walked back down the aisle together, husband and wife Emma caught Mother Constance's eye. The old nun nodded once, a blessing and a benediction. Outside, the October sun was brilliant. Leaves danced in the wind. Children threw rice and laughed. The celebration would continue at the hotel with food and music and dancing. But for a moment, Emma and Nate stood together on the church steps, looking out at the town they had helped save, the community they had become, part of the life they had built from ashes. "Ready?" Nate asked. "For what?" "Everything. The future. Whatever comes next." She smiled, squeezed his hand, and together they stepped forward into their tomorrow. They had believed. They had fought. And together they had won. This right here, right now, was their reward. Not perfection, not a life without struggle, but a chance, a second chance to get it right. And sometimes that was all anyone could ask for.